I never thought the day would come when my own son would look me in the eye and say I wasn't welcome at his wedding. I raised him. I fed him when I didn't have enough for myself. I worked in the bitter cold with calloused hands and sore knees so he could walk around in brand-name sneakers and never worry about where his next meal was coming from. And now he was sitting in my living room, cool as ice, telling me that my presence at the most important day of his life would be complicated. I was still trying to process what he said when he slid a folded piece of paper across the table. I picked it up, thinking maybe it was a half-hearted apology or some kind of explanation. But no, it was a bill. Not just any bill, an $85,000 breakdown of wedding expenses, from the venue and catering to a luxury honeymoon suite in the Maldives. And there, written neatly at the bottom, was my name. My responsibility, my contribution. Ryan didn't even flinch when he explained it. He leaned back on the couch, arm draped around his fiancée, Chloe, and said, "Dad, be grateful you get to contribute." The words stung worse than a slap. Grateful? He thought I should be thankful to be excluded from the celebration, yet still expected to bankroll the whole thing. I looked at him, searching for some trace of the boy I raised, but all I saw was a man who believed he was owed the world simply because he wanted it. Chloe didn't say much. She just crossed her legs, her diamond engagement ring flashing under the light, and gave me a polite smile, the kind you give a waiter when they refill your water glass. My ex-wife, Susan, was perched nearby, arms crossed like she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. She chimed in smoothly, "Michael, this is what families do. Don't be difficult." I could hear the satisfaction in her voice, the subtle jab she'd been holding onto since the day we divorced. She was thrilled to watch me shoved into the role of financier, not father. Inside, I was boiling. Every sacrifice I'd made for Ryan replayed in my head like a cruel montage. The second job I picked up when he wanted to join the soccer team, the nights I skipped dinner so there'd be enough for him to eat, the tuition checks that nearly bled me dry just so he could walk out of college debt-free. I remembered the time he was 12 and told me, "Dad, you're my hero. You do everything for me." That memory hit me like a punch in the gut as I watched him now, a grown man with a cold smile, treating me like a bottomless wallet. I wanted to stand up, slam the bill down, and scream, "How dare you!" I wanted to remind him of who stood by his side when no one else did, but I didn't, because in that moment, something clicked. I realized that anger would only feed his arrogance, yelling would only prove his point, that I was out of place in his shiny new world. If he saw me crack, if he saw me crumble, then he'd know he had all the power. So, I didn't yell, I didn't argue, I didn't remind him of my sacrifices or beg him to reconsider. Instead, I smiled. I looked him dead in the eye, nodded slowly, and said, "Of course, son. You'll get your dream wedding. Leave it to me." His shoulders relaxed, and he grinned, convinced he had won. Susan smirked, satisfied. Chloe tilted her head ever so slightly, like she already expected nothing less. To them, it was over. They had cornered me. But what they didn't know was that my smile wasn't agreement. It was a plan. A quiet, dangerous plan forming right there in my living room. For years, I had given and given, bending over backward to make sure Ryan had everything. And in return, he had cut me out of the biggest day of his life, reduced me to nothing more than a bank account. He thought this was checkmate. What he didn't know was that I had just flipped the board. That night, long after they left, I sat at the kitchen table with the bill in my hands. The paper shook as I gripped it tighter, but my face was calm. My son thought he had humiliated me. He thought he had stripped me of dignity. But the truth was, he had just given me the opportunity to teach him a lesson he would never forget. And I was going to make sure that when his dream wedding day arrived, he'd remember not the flowers, not the champagne, not the honeymoon in paradise, but the one thing money couldn't buy: humility. I should probably tell you who I am before you decide whether I was right or wrong for what I did. My name is Michael Danner. I'm I'm 54 years old, a father before anything else, and a man who learned a long time ago that life doesn't hand you favors. You work for what you get, and if you're lucky, you pass down something better to your children than what you started with. That was always my mission with my son, Ryan. I grew up poor. My dad walked out when I was 8, and my mother worked herself into the ground just to keep the lights on. I knew what it felt like to open the fridge and see nothing but condiments. I knew what it was like to wear the same pair of shoes until the soles split open. I swore my son would never feel that. When Susan and I had Ryan, I promised myself that he'd always know stability, comfort, and love, even if it killed me to provide it. Back then, Ryan was everything to me. When he was little, he used to run to the driveway as soon as he heard my truck pulling in after work. His hair would be messy, his face covered in dirt from playing outside, and he'd shout, "Dad's home," like it was the best part of his day. Those moments carried me through when times were tough. But then the divorce happened. Susan and I split when Ryan was 14. I won't sugarcoat it. It was ugly. She said I wasn't ambitious enough, that I was stuck in the mud with my construction business and couldn't give her the life she deserved. She wanted country clubs and ski trips. I wanted Sunday cookouts and Friday night movies. We were speaking different languages, and Ryan got caught in the middle. After the divorce, Ryan stayed with me most of the time, though Susan did her best to lure him into her new world. She remarried a man with money, and suddenly Ryan was getting glimpses of a lifestyle I couldn't compete with. I gave him hard work and discipline. She gave him vacations and shiny new toys. I'll admit I worried. I worried he'd start to resent me for not having more to give. Still, I believed in the power of sacrifice. I worked extra jobs when he wanted to join travel soccer. I skipped out on buying myself new boots when he needed a new laptop for school. And when college applications rolled around, I sat at that kitchen table night after night, filling out financial forms, taking on loans, doing whatever I had to so Ryan could get the education I never had. I thought it would all be worth it. I thought, one day he'd look back and say, "Dad gave me everything he had." And for a while I believed that was the case. But then he met Chloe. She was different from anyone Ryan had ever dated, polished, sophisticated. She grew up in a wealthy suburb, where her parents owned vacation homes and drove the luxury cars. The first time I met her, I shook her hand and noticed the way her eyes scanned me, like she was sizing up whether I belonged in her world. I didn't need her to like me, but I needed her to see the value in Ryan's roots. Instead, I watched as Ryan started adopting her values. He stopped asking me about work, stopped showing interest in our weekend fishing trips, stopped calling me Dad, and started calling me Michael when he was around her. That cut deeper than I cared to admit. He said it so casually one night. "Michael, can you grab us some beers?" Michael, not Dad. Chloe laughed like it was charming, like it was some little inside joke between them. But it wasn't a joke to me. It was the sound of a son pulling away from his father. Still, I convinced myself it was just a phase. Young men want to impress the women they love. I told myself once the wedding came around, I'd be there front and center. I'd walk into that church, shake hands with Chloe's family, and remind Ryan where he came from. I imagined us raising a toast, father and son, bridging the gap that had been growing between us. I clung to that picture. It was what kept me going when Ryan started skipping dinners with me, when he canceled our annual fishing trip for the 3rd year in a row, when he stopped returning my calls as quickly. I thought the wedding would be the place we'd mend all of that. It would be my chance to show him that, despite the divorce, despite Chloe's expectations, despite Susan's constant digs at me, I was still his father. And nothing, not money, not status, not distance, could erase that. But looking back now, I realize I was the only one holding on to that dream. Ryan had already chosen which world he wanted to live in, and it wasn't mine. The night he told me I wasn't welcome at his wedding, I saw it plain as day. He was no longer the little boy who used to run into my arms. He was a man who saw me as a liability, an embarrassment, someone who could cut a check but not share a dance. That realization didn't just break my heart, it hardened it. Because in that moment, sitting in my own living room with my ex-wife smirking at me and my son dismissing me, I finally understood. I wasn't going to get the reunion I'd been waiting for. The story I had built in my head, the proud father at his son's wedding, was gone. And that's when I knew. If Ryan was going to erase me from his life, then I was going to give him a memory he could never erase. When Ryan finally dropped the bomb, it felt like time froze. I had been waiting for the moment he would sit me down and tell me about the wedding plans. I thought maybe he'd say he wanted me to walk him into the reception hall. Or maybe he'd ask me to give a speech, something that would honor the years I put into raising him. Instead, he leaned back in my old recliner, as comfortable as if he owned the place, and said the words I'll never forget. "Dad, it's better if you don't come to the wedding." At first, I thought I misheard him. I chuckled, thinking he was joking. I said, "What do you mean?" "I'm your father. Of course, I'll be at your wedding." But Ryan didn't laugh. He didn't soften. He just gave me that practiced look he must have picked up from Chloe's family, the kind of look people give when they've decided you don't fit in their world. "Chloe's family has certain expectations," he continued, speaking carefully, like he'd rehearsed this. "It's complicated. It's not personal, but it'll be better if you don't come." Not personal? My son was telling me to stay away from the most important day of his life, and he thought that wasn't personal. My heart pounded in my chest, but before I could react, he reached into his folder and pulled out a neatly typed document. He slid it across the table like a lawyer delivering a contract. "This is the breakdown," he said casually. "Venue, catering, flowers, photographer, honeymoon. The total's $85,000. We agreed you'd cover it. It's only fair. You should be grateful you get to contribute grateful." That word cut through me like a blade. I stared at the paper, my hands trembling as I scanned the columns of numbers. Thousands for champagne, thousands for a designer dress, thousands more for a honeymoon in the Maldives, the kind of trip I never could have dreamed of affording for myself. And at the bottom, the total, $85,000. A sum that would take me years to save if I wasn't careful. I looked at Ryan, searching for the boy I once knew. The boy who used to sit with me on the back porch, eating hot dogs and talking about his dreams of being a baseball player. But that boy wasn't there. Sitting in his place was a man who saw me as nothing more than a checkbook. Chloe stayed silent, though her presence filled the room. She sat beside him, legs crossed, her expression neutral, but I caught the faintest smirk tugging at the corner of her lips, as if this whole scene was playing out exactly the way she expected. My ex-wife, Susan, on the other hand, made no effort to hide her satisfaction. She leaned forward and said, "Michael, this is just how things are done." "Don't make a scene," I turned to her, and I swear I saw something triumphant in her eyes, like she'd been waiting years to watch me get put in my place. It wasn't just Ryan rejecting me. It was Susan enjoying every second of it. The anger inside me threatened to boil over. I wanted to slam my fist on the table to shout at Ryan, "How dare you!" After everything I sacrificed, after every dime I scraped together so you could have a better life, this is how you repay me? But the words stuck in my throat. I sat there in silence, my blood pounding, while Ryan calmly tapped the paper with his pen. "Dad," he said, his voice smooth, almost patronizing, "you don't have to worry about the details. Just write the checks. It'll mean a lot to us. That was the moment I realized he wasn't just cutting me out of the wedding. He was cutting me out of his life. I wasn't a father anymore. I was an ATM with a pulse. I forced myself to breathe, to keep my face neutral. But inside, I felt something shift. A lifetime of loyalty and sacrifice, all dismissed with a single request for money. I could feel the weight of humiliation pressing down on me. It wasn't just about being banned from the wedding. It was about the total lack of respect. The way my son and ex-wife had decided I was good enough to pay, but not good enough to stand by his side. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, though my chest was burning. "You're asking me to give you $85,000 and not even be at the wedding? Do you hear yourself, Ryan?" He shrugged, as if it were nothing. "Dad, you'll understand one day. This is how it has to be. Be grateful you can help." I stared at him, my own son, and realized there was no reasoning with him. He believed he was right. He believed I owed him this. And Susan, sitting there like a queen on her throne, nodded in agreement, silently confirming that this was the new order of things. I was excluded, but expected to fund it all. The humiliation was unbearable. The betrayal, worse. I felt small in my own home, like a stranger in the family I had worked my whole life to hold together. But even as the anger twisted inside me, a strange calm washed over me. Because in that moment, I knew I had a choice. I could give in and let them take everything from me, or I could bide my time, smile through the pain, and teach my son a lesson he would never forget. When Ryan handed me that bill and told me to be grateful, something inside me broke, but not in the way he thought. He believed he had won, that his demand left me powerless, but what he didn't realize was that in that moment, I stopped being the desperate father clinging to a fantasy of reconciliation. Instead, I became the man who was finally ready to teach him the kind of lesson only life, or a father who has had enough, can teach. I sat there with the paper in my hands, my ex-wife's smug grin burning into me, Chloe's quiet confidence radiating off her, and Ryan's smug certainty hanging heavy in the air. The old me would have argued, begged, or even given in, swallowing my pride for the sake of keeping the peace, but not this time. This time, I leaned back, forced a small smile, and said, "Of course, son. You'll get your dream wedding." "Leave it to me." Ryan's shoulders relaxed, Chloe glanced at him with approval, and Susan gave me a look that almost said, "Finally, you're doing what you should have been doing all along." They thought I had surrendered. But that smile of mine? That was the start of a storm they didn't see coming. When they left that night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at the itemized bill. My anger simmered into focus. Every number on that sheet, $12,000 for flowers, $20,000 for the honeymoon suite, $5,000 for a private driver, wasn't just an expense. It was a statement. A statement that my son believed he was above me, that my sweat and my sacrifices were nothing but fuel for his vanity. I knew I couldn't yell him out of this delusion. Words wouldn't reach him. But reality could. Reality was a teacher more brutal than any father, and I was going to let it do the work for me. The plan started forming almost instantly. First, I agreed to take responsibility for the payments. That was crucial. If I showed resistance, they would sniff me out. Instead, I made a show of it. I called Ryan the next day, voice steady, and said, "Don't worry about the arrangements. I'll handle it all, just focus on Chloe." He thanked me, sounding almost proud, like a king bestowing duties upon his servant. Step one was in place. Then I started making calls. Instead of paying deposits under my name, I told vendors to place everything under Ryan's. The florist, the caterer, the band, they all had his contact information, his billing details. I accidentally played the role of the confused father who wasn't sure how modern weddings worked. Most of them didn't care. To them, business was business. If Ryan's name was on the contract, then Ryan was responsible. Next, I turned to the honeymoon. They had picked an absurdly overpriced package. A 5-star resort in the Maldives, complete with a private villa and butler service. I called the travel agency, smiled politely, and canceled the reservation. In its place, I booked a modest, refundable trip for 2 at a basic lodge stateside. Same dates, same names, but a world apart in experience. Each change I made was small enough not to raise suspicion, but devastating enough to unravel their perfect image when the day came. I wasn't sabotaging Ryan out of spite. I was crafting a mirror that would force him to face who he had become. But the most important part of the plan wasn't financial. It was symbolic. I wanted Ryan to know this wasn't about me being petty or vengeful. It was about teaching him that respect, humility, and gratitude matter more than marble floors and champagne fountains. So, I sat down with pen and paper and began drafting a letter. Not long, not angry, just the truth. Every word deliberate, every line meant to pierce deeper than any canceled contract ever could. Son, for 27 years, I carried your burden so you could walk freely. I worked so you could dream. And now, you've chosen to erase me, reducing me to nothing more than a wallet. That stops today. Consider this my final gift, not money, but responsibility. One day, you'll understand why I sealed the letter, tucked it away, and waited. For the weeks leading up to the wedding, Ryan and Chloe barely spoke to me, except for the occasional text reminding me about the costs. Dad, the caterer needs the balance soon. Michael, don't forget the photographer deposit. Each message was colder than the last, more transactional. They thought I was handling it. And in a way, I was. The night before the wedding, I sat at my kitchen table again, just like I had the night they gave me that bill. Only this time, I felt calm. I wasn't the broken father anymore. I was the man who had taken back control. Ryan believed his world was set. He believed the wedding would unfold perfectly, that the honeymoon would dazzle, that he would never have to face the consequences of his arrogance. What he didn't know was that I had built every detail of this event on sand. And when the tide came in, when the reality of unpaid bills and canceled luxury crashed into his celebration, he would finally understand what I meant when I said I would give him his dream wedding. Because his dream wasn't going to end with champagne toasts and fireworks. It was going to end with a lesson written in stone. The morning of the wedding arrived, and for the first time in weeks I felt at peace. I didn't put on a suit, I didn't polish my shoes, I didn't prepare a speech. I made myself a simple breakfast, poured a cup of black coffee, and sat at the table where this whole mess had begun. My son's big day was finally here, and I wasn't invited. But that didn't mean I wasn't involved. From the outside, everything looked like it was going smoothly. The venue, an extravagant ballroom in the city, was buzzing with guests dressed to the nines. Chloe floated in like a movie star in her custom gown, her parents smiling proudly beside her. Ryan strutted in wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than my first truck. Everyone clapped, cameras flashed, and for a moment, I imagine he thought his world was perfect. But perfection has a way of cracking when you least expect it. It started small. The florist showed up at the venue, arms full of arrangements, and asked to see Ryan about the balance on the flowers. The staff assumed it was some minor miscommunication, but when Ryan heard about it, his jaw tightened. He pulled Chloe aside, whispering furiously, then pulled out his phone to call me. I let it ring. I knew exactly what that call was about. Next came the caterer. Plates of hors d'oeuvres were lined up, champagne chilled, but the head chef was looking for final payment. Ryan was mid-conversation with Chloe's uncle when the caterer interrupted him, papers in hand. Guests started noticing the tension. A few raised eyebrows, whispers floating through the air like smoke. Then the band leader walked in. "We'll need to settle the invoice before we play a note," he said bluntly. This time, Ryan's composure cracked. His face turned red as he snapped, "My father is handling this." He said it loud enough for a few nearby guests to hear, and just like that, the whispers spread. People started asking each other, "Where is the father of the groom? Why isn't he here?" By the time the ceremony ended and the reception began, the cracks had split wide open. The photographer cornered Chloe, reminding her they needed a check before the edited album would be delivered. Chloe's expression shifted from joy to fury in seconds. She spun on Ryan, hissing, "I thought your dad was paying for everything." He stammered. He said he would. Meanwhile, the vendors didn't stop coming, each one with contracts, invoices, and demands, and with every confrontation more guests began to notice the tension. The glamorous wedding started to look less like a fairy tale and more like a disaster unraveling in real time. But the real blow came when the honeymoon was revealed. Chloe's maid of honor had been gushing about their Maldives trip all evening, how jealous she was of their private villa and luxury package. Chloe beamed with pride, until she opened the envelope with the reservation details. Instead of Maldives, it listed a modest lakeside lodge 2 states away, a place known more for camping and fishing than butlers and champagne. Her face drained of color. She shoved the paper at Ryan, eyes blazing. "What is this?" she hissed, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Ryan looked at the reservation, then back at her, and panic spread across his features. Guests nearby saw it. Some tried not to stare, but others couldn't help themselves. Phones came out, snapping pictures, recording videos. The perfect image Ryan and Chloe had tried to build was crumbling right there in front of everyone. And then came the final nail in the coffin. Right as Ryan was desperately trying to smooth things over, a server approached with a small envelope. "This was left for you," the server said, placing it in Ryan's hands. I had written it weeks ago, sealed it, and arranged for it to be delivered at the reception. Ryan opened it, probably expecting a check, maybe a last-minute apology. Instead, he found my handwriting. "Son, I spent 27 years paying your bills, carrying you on my back, giving you everything I had. You chose to ban me from your wedding, but still expected me to fund your life. Today, you learn what I've always known. A man is measured not by what he takes, but by what he earns. Consider this your gift, responsibility." Dad, I can only imagine the look on his face as he read it. I wasn't there, but the texts started coming in almost immediately from relatives and even old friends who attended. Some said Ryan tore the letter in half. Others said Chloe stormed out in tears, shouting about how humiliated she was. One guest told me Susan tried to take control, blaming me loudly, but by then the damage was done. The truth was out. The vendors weren't paid, the honeymoon was ruined. The fairy tale wedding turned into a public spectacle. And my son, who thought he could strip me of my dignity while still milking me dry, had to face the reality of his choices in front of everyone who mattered to him. At home, I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat quietly by the window. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just let the silence sink in. I knew Ryan hated me in that moment. I knew Chloe probably saw him differently now. But deep down, I also knew something else. He would never forget this day. Not because of the dress or the flowers, but because of the lesson. In the days after the wedding, my phone didn't stop buzzing. Some calls I answered, most I didn't. The first one came from Susan, her voice sharp and venomous, blaming me for ruining Ryan's future. She spat words like daggers. "You humiliated him. You embarrassed Chloe. You'll never be forgiven." I listened in silence, then hung up without saying a word. For the first time in years, I felt no obligation to defend myself. Then came the messages from relatives who'd been there. My brother called and said, "Mike, it was like watching a train wreck in slow motion." Everyone saw Ryan and Chloe snapping at each other. By the time the band packed up, half the guests had left early. People are saying it's the most awkward wedding they've ever been to. He chuckled, almost admiring the precision of what I'd done. But I didn't laugh. This wasn't about revenge. It was about the truth finally catching up to my son. Ryan didn't call me. Not that week, not the next. Instead, I heard through the grapevine that Chloe's parents were furious. They'd covered what they could on the spot to prevent total collapse, but the damage was irreversible. Videos had spread online, guests recording arguments, Chloe's furious reaction to the honeymoon fiasco, even the moment Ryan tore my letter in half. What should have been their fairy tale had turned into a spectacle, and once the whispers began, they couldn't be stopped. I won't lie. Part of me hurt, a deep, aching hurt. No father dreams of being remembered as the man who sabotaged his son's wedding. I'd spent years imagining a toast, a dance, maybe a hug at the end of the night with tears in both our eyes. But that dream had been dead long before the wedding day. Ryan buried it himself when he told me I wasn't welcome, when he looked me in the face and saw not his father but a bank account. Still, there was guilt. I sat at my kitchen table late at night, staring at that empty chair across from me, wondering if I had gone too far. Had I destroyed my relationship with my son forever? Could he ever understand why I did it? The silence in my house weighed on me, heavier than bricks. But guilt wasn't the only thing I felt. There was also a strange sense of peace. For once, I had drawn a line. For once, I hadn't let myself be used, belittled, or erased. My son may have hated me for it, but he couldn't ignore me anymore. My absence had been louder than my presence ever could have been. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, bits of news reached me. Ryan and Chloe's honeymoon never happened. They canceled it entirely after the disaster of the reception. Chloe moved back in with her parents for a while, and I heard whispers that their relationship was strained. Ryan had to take out loans to pay the vendors, loans that carried interest and responsibility he had never faced before. For the first time in his life, there was no safety net, no one to swoop in and clean up the mess. And though it pained me, I knew that was exactly what he needed. Responsibility, consequence, reality. One evening, nearly 3 months after the wedding, my phone rang. It was Ryan. His voice was tight, flat, as if it took everything in him just to call. He didn't apologize, not directly. He said, "Dad, you didn't have to do it like that." I waited, giving him space to continue. He sighed, the kind of sigh that carried exhaustion, regret, and a little bit of shame. "I get it now. I wasn't ready. I took you for granted. But you didn't have to make a scene for a moment. I almost softened. I almost said I was sorry. But then I remembered the way he had looked at me that night, dismissive, arrogant, ungrateful. So instead, I chose honesty. Son, life doesn't hand out apologies before it teaches you a lesson. You'll understand that more and more as you get older. I didn't do this to humiliate you. I did it so you'd stop humiliating yourself. A man who demands without respect is no man at all." There was silence on the other end. No shouting, no excuses, just silence. Then he hung up. And though my heart ached, I knew those words would linger with him longer than any fight could have. Now, when I think about that day, I don't feel pride or bitterness. I feel clarity. A father's job isn't to give his children everything they want. It's to prepare them for a world that doesn't care about their wants. A world that demands resilience, responsibility, and humility. I gave Ryan a gift far greater than an $85,000 wedding. I gave him the chance to finally grow up. Maybe one day he'll thank me. Maybe he won't. But I can live with that. Because at the end of the day, I'm not just his father. I'm the man who reminded him that respect isn't bought, it's earned. And if that lesson cost him a dream wedding, then so be it. Because the truth is, I didn't ruin his dream. I saved him from a nightmare he was already living. And that's my story. A father who gave everything, only to be told he wasn't welcome at his own son's wedding. Maybe you think I went too far. Maybe you think I did exactly what had to be done. Either way, I know this. Sometimes love means stepping back, letting life teach the lessons we can't, even when it breaks our hearts. Now, I want to hear from you. What would you have done if your own child tried to ban you from their wedding but still demanded you pay for it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'd love to know your perspective. If you found this story powerful, make sure to give the video a like. It really helps more people find these stories. Share it with a friend who loves dramatic, real-life tales, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. Trust me, I've got plenty more stories that will keep you hooked. Thanks for watching, and remember, Respect and gratitude aren't optional, they're earned.